Welcome to a special presentation of Veterans in Transition. As a commemorative partner with the United States Vietnam War Commemoration, Veterans in Transition assembled 5 Vietnam-era veterans to share their story of service, lessons learned, and giving back to the community. The Vietnam War Commemoration and its collaborative partners are uniting in communities across the nation to thank and honor Vietnam veterans and their families for their service and sacrifice. Today, it is estimated there are 7 million living U.S. Vietnam veterans, all who served on active duty between November 1, 1955 and May 15, 1975. During this episode, you'll hear from service members who fought and served in supporting roles, but all who deserve our respect and admiration for their dedication. But first, a few words from Colonel John Radke, United States Army retired, who, at the conclusion of the program, will pin all our Vietnam veterans.
The thrust of what we're doing is we want to help from DC, help all of these 10,800 commemorative partners. We want America to thank its brothers, sisters that live nearby. We want to reach out and essentially provide a framework. We'll send the pins, we'll send the fact sheets. It's not us doing that, but it's America as proclaimed by President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, to reach out, touch the people who gave so very much. We're losing over 500 Vietnam veterans a day. And so the mission is important. So I would ask you that are friends with folks that aren't here tonight, or if you know they're survivors, please let them know what we do. On behalf of the nation, behalf of the presidents and the Congress members, congressional members, and all of the great people that you served, thank you so very much for what you did, what you're doing, and I know what you'll continue to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The interesting thought that came to mind is that it was in the Navy on active duty aboard an LSD-13 named the Casa Grande. I studied Spanish with my friends who came up from Cuba during that era in the late 50s and early 60s. And so all of this was kind of synchronistic, I suppose, because my life became so much synchronistic as I moved on from age 10 years of age. I joined the Navy because my dad had given me lots of great stories of his experiences in the Navy. He was a CB construction worker in the Philippine area, somewhere over there. And I heard great stories, so the only place that I felt that I should go was the Navy. At the age of 16, I asked my mom to allow me to join the Navy Reserve. The port of Palm Beach was just a few blocks away, basically, and I wanted to be able to start my career early because I knew exactly what I wanted to do in my life. Mom said, "No, I don't want you to go fight." I said, "Mom, sailors are not going to be on the beach fighting. They're going to be on the ship off the coast a little bit." But I couldn't convince my mom that I wouldn't be actually engaging in fighting, although I wanted to actually become go into the submarine duty. She talked me out of that as well. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I turned, my birthday was August 8th. So August 8th, the year that I graduated from school, I went down on August 9th and signed up. Went to boot camp, did all those things. Since I was in the reserves, I had an option to go on active duty right away or wait 2 years or 4 years, depending on that 6-year enlistment that I had. I chose the second set of 2 years and got married 30 days before I went into the Navy. And it was quite interesting because I'd always had my own business, as I said, from age 10. And by the time I got into, 7th grade, 8th grade, I didn't realize it, but I was already earning as much money, if not more, than my dad. The humility of that man and the stories he had told me, he never asked me for a penny. And when I went away to the Great Lakes to serve in my first 90 days of training, he paid my car note. So when I went on active duty, some great things really happened. I ended up getting a hernia. Within a week here in Baltimore, we were pulling those heavy lines, and they took me to Annapolis. I always wanted to go to Annapolis to be a cadet there. But anyhow, I ended up there in the hospital. And when I got back aboard ship, they asked our electrical division, I was an electrical fireman, they call it at that time, who could type? Well, there's about 30 guys in our E division aboard ship, and I raised my hand, and when I looked around, I had my hand was the only hand that was up. So I ended up being assigned to a new division, a new office called Maintenance Data Collection. Well, I had been a mathematician all my days going through school. I love math, I love science, all of that good stuff. And so it was really right on for me. I was able to organize that office with the direction of the executive officer and the officer over the electrical division. And all of these things happened to me, and I'm only an E3. Only an E3. They did not have a specific billet for that particular job, so I stayed as an E3 for the next 2 years. There were no testings for me, and I just said, okay, I'll just do what I have to do. And in that process, aboard ship, I decided I needed to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. Loving math, over months and months of talking through that process, I decided, wow, you know what? Businesses need accountants all the time. And when business is really bad, they really need accountants. And that drove my desire to become an accountant. Having lost a scholarship in high school due to the fact that I was a musician, and the school that I was transferred into my last 2 years due to segregation, and they wanted me to come in and help break that barrier. I didn't really, it wasn't fun. It really was not fun. And in that process, I realized I have to go into the service to get my 4-year degree. And so it took me 10 years from the date of my being released from the Navy, which was in '68, the year my son was born, and the MC as well, as he was telling me earlier. And in doing that, I toughed it out, worked 2 or 3 jobs, you know the story, and went part-time. Finally, I had 2 more years to use my GI benefits or lose them. And I decided I'm going to pay off all my bills 2 years ahead of time. I'm going to get everything in order. And finally, I went ahead and got my degree from between '77 and '78. Graduating December of '78, I opened my first accounting office in January of '79, and I'm still doing the same work many years later. The military did one other thing for me. It gave me an opportunity to start an office that I had never run before. It gave me an opportunity to be a part of men who were really, really great with what they did. And I learned a lot of ways to manage men, to be a leader, to make sure that there was peace within the organization and that everybody got their true rewards out of it all. I left the Navy with some very beautiful accommodation letters as an E3. My desire was to continue on with what I knew best, and that is to build businesses. The transition was very easy for me because my mind was already to build a business. I had my 10, 20-year plans ahead of me, and life just takes us down that road, lots of twists and turns. Throughout my career, whenever I would find a buddy, a brother who needed some work or needed something to help them get by, I would always step in and try to do whatever I could in that process. I had a very proud 6 years in the Navy, 2 years active reserve, 2 years active duty, and 2 years inactive reserves. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is my picture here. I was 19 years old, right there. Yes, and those are sandbags behind me. When I was growing up, I was watching Have Gun Will Travel with Richard Boone. I was watching Davy Crockett, Wanted Dead or Alive. I was watching all of these shows, and everybody was carrying a what? A gun. And then as I got older, at age 16, I was watching combat in Vietnam on TV with Walter Cronkite. And I told my dad and my mom at age 16, I want that. I want to go to combat. I want to go to Vietnam and serve my country. And my mother would have none of it. But my father said, get the papers, we'll sign them. With 6 kids in the family, we're living in the projects, 3 kids in each room. My dad was making about $150 a week. I don't know about you guys, but we grew up on surplus food. All my clothes came from the Salvation Army. And you know what? I was the luckiest kid in the world. I was happy with what I had. And I gave thanks to God for what I had. At any rate, I joined the Marine Corps at age 17. And I graduated from high school in 1966. In June of 1966. And in July of 1966, I was in an exotic island called Parris Island, South Carolina. Marine Corps boot camp at 17 years old. All I will say, and for the other Marines in here that know, it was quite an experience. But I look back on it now, and I take great pride in the fact that I went through that. That I am one of the few, the proud, the Marines. It means a lot for us that serve in the Marine Corps, just like it does for you all that served in the Air Force, the Army, or whatever. I take great pride in that. So I went to Vietnam at age 18. I volunteered to go because I wanted to go and fight for my country. It was a thing I wanted to do. And a lot of us did. I didn't wait for the draft. I wanted to be there. I wanted to wear that Marine Corps uniform. That's what I wanted. From the time I was small, my cousin had served in the Marine Corps, and he'd come and visit. And I wanted that. So I went to Vietnam at 18 and saw some things that aren't nice. And did my 13 months there. I tell you, when I first got there, the Paris peace talks had just begun. And myself and a guy by the name of Bob Muller, he was from Queens, New York, we said, the Paris peace talks are here. We're going to be going home next month. 6 years later, the peace talks are still going on. So we didn't go home early. We spent our time in Vietnam, lost a couple of friends. I was in a relatively safe place. I really was. I was blessed. But many of the gentlemen that I served with were in the bush, in brutal combat, and a number of them didn't make it back. And God bless their souls. May they rest in eternal peace. I came back, and I didn't want to go to Rochester, New York. All of my friends were getting arrested. There was a lot of drugs back in the day, back in the 60s. Back then it was heroin, and a lot of people just weren't doing anything. And there was nothing there for me, just nothing. I wanted to have an adventure in life, not just go back there, be with my family and work in Xerox and Delco and General Motors and so forth. So I re-enlisted. I re-enlisted for 4 years, and I went to Iwakuni, Japan for 4 years. And I re-enlisted again and again and again. And ultimately, I had 21 years in the Marine Corps. My last duty assignment was in Rota, Spain, where I was working with the signal intelligence community. And I decided to get out. I had 15 years overseas out of 21 years of active duty. I had 15 years overseas. My older son had left for the Naval Academy. Believe it or not, he's a retired naval officer now. And he'll be 49 next month. I came back home, and I always wanted to own my own company. Now, in the Marine Corps, I was an enlisted guy. I was a master sergeant. And let's face it, you have this thing called rank in the military, and you can only do so much based on the rank you have. You know, if you're a 2-star general, you can't do what a 3- and 4-star general does. If you're a colonel in the Marine Corps, you can't do what a BG or a 3- or 4-star does. And if you're a master sergeant, well, damn it, you can't even do what a second lieutenant does. I did, but nonetheless, I wanted to do something. I wanted to be, I hate to coin a phrase from the Army, but I wanted to be all I could be. Do you understand what I'm saying? You wanted to just cut loose and say, I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to try my very best to do what I want to do. So I've always wanted to own my own business. I always had organizational skills. I was able to work and get things done through people. That's called leadership, by the way. Get things done through people. A lost art in many cases. And consequently, I went to work for small business when I first got out of the Marines. And I started reading up on doing work with the federal government because I was working with a federal government contractor right here around the Beltway. I had nothing, by the way. I didn't have a bank account when I got out of the Marine Corps because I had traveled to so many different countries. I had the Navy Federal Credit Union, but I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have a lending history. I had nothing. I didn't even have a suit when I got out of the Marine Corps. I had my dress blues and my greens. Really. The first job I went to with a contract, I worked with NASA, putting together the space station program office. I got this brown jacket, corduroy, with little patches in the back, like Father Knows Best. And I got some little brown trousers and some orange socks, and a little orange tie. And I walked into my first job, and the lady said, Mr. Gatgewood, you look like a cantaloupe. She was right. She said, boy, tomorrow I'm bringing you a GQ magazine. And she taught me how to dress. Because I didn't know. From age 17 to age 38, I wore a uniform. I never had a need for a suit. So I worked for a couple of small businesses. And the last one I worked for, the second one I worked for, I learned a lot about cost accounting systems, defense contractor auditing agency, job cost accounting, indirect rates and so forth, how to structure your rates for the federal government when you're charging for services and stuff. And I wanted to do basically what I did in the military. I want to provide logistical services, intelligence services, or intel services, and the like. And I met a lady who was providing my company at the time, the company I was working with, temporary engineers. And we became very close. And we were sitting down for lunch. She goes, you know, you're the kind of guy who could really start your own business. You ought to do this. And I told her, I said, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And she looked at me and said, what the hell is that? I said, you know, one of those people that owns their own businesses. She goes, you mean entrepreneur? So now I are one. It doesn't matter what you do in this life, whether you're an entrepreneur. If you do what you do honestly and with integrity, and you give thanks every day you get up for what you have, for the very breath you take, life is good and very good. We've got a lot of things going on in this country of ours right now, but you know what? It's still the best damn place in the world to be living. And we can only pray that things get better. So I sold quality support in December. I got a handsome price for it. And I started the Gatgewood Group, LLC, and now I'm a one-person company where I help other veterans start their businesses, and I don't charge them a dime. I'm also the vice chair of the Code of Support Foundation, and I help other veterans with their resumes, with job placement, and I also put out a newsletter 3 times a week that gets out to over 9,000 people, mostly our veterans. And that's all about giving back. And that's what, to me, life is all about. It was about the service in Vietnam. It's about starting this business, taking care of our employees the way they should be taken care of. It's all about giving back. I'm thankful to be here and thankful for this opportunity to talk to you all. Bless you.
Let me bring it into focus a little bit. We're talking about 50 years in Vietnam. Now, if you even try to do research on Vietnam today, you can't find North Vietnam and South Vietnam because it's just Vietnam. It's a war that we fought that we didn't win. Why were we there? Why was I there? So my story tonight is a little bit about what was I doing there? Why did I join the Army? What on earth did I do over there? How did it affect me? What was it like coming home? And how did it affect the rest of my life? It didn't start in Vietnam, much like all of us. Our life starts when we're quite young. So when I was young, I dreamt that life would be bigger and better. I came from a relatively low-income environment and had a little difficulty getting any mentorship or understanding what life was all about, but I knew there was something out there. And I want to tell you, Vietnam was what inspired me to do more, to be more, and to become the person I became today. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why did I join the Army? You know, you heard some of the other folks talk a little bit about what it was like in the 60s, and I know that many of you were there. But in the 60s, women didn't have a lot of opportunity. I wanted to be an engineer. They said, not so fast. You could be a nurse, you can be a teacher, or you can be a secretary. So I thought for a while, and I was pretty obedient, sort of goes with being in the military. I said, okay, I'll be a nurse, because I always wanted to give back. So I became a nurse. And again, in the 60s, it was Walter Cronkite on television talking about the daily body count. It was impressive, especially to this naive young girl who wanted to do something. I said, that's my higher calling. That's my higher calling. One of my instructors gave a slideshow on her experience in Korea. There's her standing there in her wool fatigues in a tent, a 55-gallon drum where they had a fire to keep warm. What was I thinking? But I did it. Right after that, I went down to the Army nurse recruiter and I signed up. I swore to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And every time I think about that, it gives me chills. Joining the Army saved my life, gave me purpose, but Vietnam is why I did it. So let's talk about what I did when I was there. I ended up at the 91st Evacuation Hospital in Chu Lai, just south of Da Nang, up in I Corps. It was hot. It was not at all what I expected. And of course, we didn't have the web, so you couldn't really research an awful lot about what it was. And I had very little background in, my geography was very poor. Didn't know what I was really getting myself into. But I knew those soldiers out there needed help. They needed nurses. I knew people were dying. And do you know that in Vietnam, we saved 70% of every one of those soldiers that got to medical facilities. 70% who were injured in Vietnam. That was unheard of in previous wars. So nurses were very important. Our motto was aid to the wounded. I was first assigned to the emergency and receiving area, and we hired some of the local population. This is us in front of the heliport at the hospital. So here's how it worked in the emergency department there. The phone would ring or the radio would go off, and we'd get a message that within 8 minutes, we would get X number of casualties. 5 gunshot wounds, 3 frag wounds, head injuries, abdominal injuries, missing limbs, and we had to mobilize. Now, the first time that happened when I was alone on the night shift, I was the only nurse on duty, and I had to send runners, which were my only corpsmen, over to wake up the doctors and the other nurses to come, and I could hear the chopper coming before anybody else was there. And that was very vivid in my memory. We had the emergency room set up so that the litters could come in. The IVs were already hanging. We had all the equipment and supplies ready to go. Called the blood bank. We got low titer O positive blood because that was the most common that would treat the most number of injuries. The helicopter would land, the litter bearers would run out, not the corpsmen and not the nurses. The picture that a lot of people have is that we ran out to the helicopter or ran to the field. We were in the hospital. The litter bearers ran, brought the patients to us. We were standing ready in the emergency room, even had the tape ready to go. We tore the tape and taped it to our uniforms so that we didn't have to waste any time. When we started IVs that I swear were as big around as your little finger in those GIs whose blood vessels had failed because they were in shock. The emergency room came alive. We were very busy. I don't have a lot of shots of what it was like, but we were busy. We could get those guys triaged, rank ordered. I could shave somebody's head with a straight razor to get them ready for a craniotomy in less than 5 minutes. They'd be in the operating room within 10 minutes, and we saved a lot of lives. The hardest time for me was when I found out that the ones that we got through this process, and I'd go to see them in the recovery room or in the intensive care unit, and I found out they died. We learned a lot in Vietnam. We learned about shock lung, which is what your body does when it's in what's called irreversible shock, and your lungs quit working. We learned how to treat that, but not in time to save a lot of the GIs that were injured. Now fast forward here, after Vietnam, I chose to move to the reserve. It was a difficult time. Continued my military training, managed a family, got married, had a couple kids. But then my medical background transitioned into biological warfare issues, and I became interested in preparing for the disasters that were looming, the asymmetric threats, and I began working in weapons of mass destruction. I retired in 2005, but I want to tell you what a great thing it is to pass the baton to the next generation. This is me with my daughter at her commissioning. She's deployed 3 times. So I have to say that oftentimes our challenges turn into opportunities. And Vietnam was that event that drove me to dream, to continue the dream, to learn, to do, and to become. And quickly I'll tell you that today, my issue, based on the fact that I was in Vietnam for a war that a senior leader had decided was reasonable, that cost us so many lives. My focus is on senior leader decision-making. The governor, the mayor, the president, the congressman. How are we going to do that? Very quickly, wicked solutions. I want to tell you, beat the clock, save lives, restore order. That's my mantra. Wicked problems are those confounding problems that there's no right answer, no wrong answer, but everything you do has consequences that cause you more problems. It's the whack-a-mole thing. So if you look at 9/11, what happened? Did leadership drive us to a better outcome or a worse? And in Katrina, we still don't know how many people died in Katrina because we can't count the number of people whose lives were lost because a decision was made to send them somewhere where we could not help them. And then Ebola, one of the most recent issues I worked on from a policy perspective. So what I did was take our exercising programs and look at them as how we can make that into a game, a simulation where we train people through a metric to measure their performance on past performance and provide them with insights to learn so you can practice being the mayor, the governor, the president before you get into the job and do a better job. That's what I do. That's what I learned. And Vietnam was really what pushed me into doing that and seeing maybe failure, but learning and understanding what success looks like. I thank you for your attention.
First, I want to talk a little bit about something that I'm really proud of that I did 3 years ago that, Colonel, you probably know something about as well. I was working with the local hospice organization, Hospice of the Chesapeake. They came to me because they, as some of their patients, Vietnam veterans that were at the end of life, they discovered that many of these folks were dealing with some unresolved issues that related to their service in Vietnam. And they wanted to do something, so they came to me. Now, I am currently the only Vietnam veteran in the Senate of Maryland, and there's only one Vietnam veteran in the House. So there are only two of us, and you mentioned earlier 500 a day we're losing. So I'm hoping to stick around for that 2025 event. Yeah, I got it going. I got the good genes. Levi's is what I prefer. But anyway, the hospice folks approached me, and they wanted a bill introduced which would designate March 30th as Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day in Maryland. Now, obviously, the president didn't look at our bill if he's doing the 29th, but I asked the question, why the 30th and not the 31st, which is my birthday, which would have been a double celebration? It was because that's the day that the last combat troops left the country. I put the bill in. Every member of the Senate wanted to be a co-sponsor. Then the House found out that we were doing this bill, and they wanted one. Every member of the House was a co-sponsor. The bills were both passed, and the governor on the 30th of March signed those bills into law. Actually, he signed mine, but it became the law. The last 3 years, we've had an event. We had almost 1,400 people in attendance, so it's really been a very good thing. Now, I had a reporter ask me, what's the point in this? Well, the point is that we're bringing these Vietnam veterans back together where they can talk to each other. And I'll talk about the importance of that in a moment. I enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve. I picked what I thought was the toughest place. I went to that lovely spot, that island, at Paris Island. I got into school and I got in a commissioning program. That was in the spring of 1962. I graduated from college in 1966. I was commissioned as a regular officer in the United States Marine Corps. I went to flight school. I was designated as a helicopter pilot, and between the time I got my wings in February of '68, within 8 weeks I was in Vietnam flying combat in the middle of the Tet Offensive. Not a great time to be flying helicopters in Vietnam. But we did it all. We put troops in the field. We resupplied them with food, water, and ammunition while they were there. We did medevacs. We did visual reconnaissance. We'd take recon teams out, and then we'd go back to recover them. But it was a fairly hazardous occupation, actually. I got wounded twice, and I'm very, very fortunate. I have no disability. I have scars. I got a piece of metal in one leg. I got some really great stories. I also survived one mid-air collision, and to this day, no one can explain why my helicopter didn't come apart in the air, and I managed to get it on the ground, and all of us walked away. So, but the work, as General said, it was hard and arduous, and we worked long hours, and we didn't get a lot of rest, and I was flying every day, dog tired. I got a picture at home. You can see the dark circles under my eyes because we just weren't getting the kind of rest. But you couldn't stop. We had a mission, and we had to carry it out. Now, the question that was often raised was, what are we doing here? Well, we didn't worry so much about the overarching questions about why was the American military in Vietnam, but ours was more, we're here to support the Marines on the ground. That was the mission. And we had a little saying that we used to throw about it, and it recognized, I guess, how we felt about our fellow Marines. Better dead than look bad. You never wanted to let anybody down, and you do whatever it took to ensure that you never let anyone down. So after 13 months, I came home, and the reentry process was interesting. For many of the military people, they came home individually. We didn't deploy by units as they do today. We went on individual orders, and then you came home individually. In some cases, some of the troops that came out of the field, within 2 weeks, they were out of the Army, out of the Marine Corps, and they were back home in their town and wherever, trying to reintegrate themselves into a community that didn't want them, didn't care, that blamed them for the war. For them, it was very difficult. There was no one to talk to. They didn't have the ability to rehash these stories over and over again. And one of the advantages that I think I had was that I stayed, I was a regular officer, so I was still on active duty, and I stayed another 5 years after I came back from Vietnam. But I was serving with many of the same people I'd served with in Vietnam. And we told those stories over and over again. And I think that was the thing that helped us come back to earth, come back to being real people without suffering some of the things that the others did. A lot of the homelessness and the drug addiction and the alcoholism is related to the fact that many of these people came home with psychological issues that they couldn't deal with, and there was no one to help them deal with it, and no one really cared. I did fly for the president. I got selected for that. It was a pretty neat job. People often say, you got any stories? Everything that we did was done by the book. There were never any glitches. Everything was done perfectly, and there are no stories. So when I finished that tour, then I had orders back overseas again. But by that time, the war was essentially over. And then in April of 1975, I was in Okinawa, and we got flapped out for the final evacuation. I came back from that, and my second son was born. It was the second time I was gone, and I determined I was done with these deployments until the Gulf War. Then I have to tell you a quick story about that in a minute. But anyway, I got out. But I didn't want to give up the 10-year commitment that I'd made investment, so I stayed in the reserves, did another 20 as an active reserve. I worked it pretty hard, and then retired on 30 years as a full colonel. I'm very proud of my service, and I think I sometimes tell people of all the things I've done with my life, the thing about which I am most proud is my service as a Marine. But a little quick story, I got activated because I didn't want to miss the war. And a friend of mine was in charge of officer assignments at Headquarters Marine Corps. So I went to see him and asked him to put my name into the computer program so when they activated the reserves, I'd get a set of orders. Well, the orders came on Valentine's Day. Now, we're in session. Our legislature was in session. And I had one kid at the Naval Academy Prep School in Rhode Island and another kid about to graduate. And my wife had to sign for these orders on Valentine's Day, and she really wasn't happy. And because it was during the legislative session, it was newsworthy. I'm leaving the legislature to go to war. And so there's a party, and a reporter was there, wanted to interview my wife about how she felt about her husband going to war. So the reporter put the mic into her face and said, "So what do you think about your husband volunteering to go to war?" And my wife said, "Well, I think he's a self-centered jerk that doesn't think about anybody but himself." As fortune would have it, the mic was turned off, and that was never recorded. So, But after I got out of the Marine Corps, I had to figure out what am I going to do with my life. And the only thing I really knew how to do was fly. And so I got a job with the Baltimore City Police Department, flying a helicopter with the police department. It was an interesting job. I learned a lot about law enforcement. I learned about the culture of police departments. And so I was with some of my friends one night, and I mentioned this, and somebody said, you know, you should run for mayor of Annapolis. I thought, wow, that's an interesting idea. So I did. On a lark, I filed and ran as a candidate. I won the primary, and I lost the general election. Now, while losing's not good, in this case, it was really the best thing in retrospect, because the following year, I ran for the House of Delegates, and I won. And I've got now 35 uninterrupted years of service to my community as a member, first of the House of Delegates for 12 years, and now as the Senate of Maryland for the last 23 years. I've been able to give back to my community, and that's, I think, if I look at my life and what's happened over the years, it's been a life of service from the time I graduated from college until today. But the one thing, I guess, that I carried away from my experiences in Vietnam was that no matter how bad things get, I always have the ability to reach down and pull up what I need to accomplish the mission. So, thank you all for letting me be here.
What I didn't hear in that bio was I was born and raised in Prince George's County. And probably at 6 years old, went out to Andrews Air Force Base for the air show. And from that point, I was hooked. All I wanted to do was fly. Anything, any way, anywhere. I can remember talking to my father as I'm maybe 16 or 17 years old, and told him, hey, I want to go in the Army, because you could be a helicopter pilot at 18 years old then. There were a bunch of Army 19-year-old helicopter pilots in Vietnam, and I expected to be one of them. And he asked me, okay, you want to go to Vietnam? I said, well, you know, not really, but that's where the helicopters are. I want to go flying. So reluctantly, he signed and allowed me to enlist in the Army at 17 years old. So the spring of 1969, I'm on my way. Didn't become a helicopter pilot, but after 2 or 3 people told me, no, I can't do it, I said, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I've read the pubs, I passed this test, I passed that test, I should be in there. I'm going to sign up anyway, and I'll go someplace else, and I'll get a different opinion. Well, the different opinion never came. So I spent 3 years as a crew chief and door gunner. In late 1969, I'm on my way to Vietnam. Okay, I think they had like a rule that you had to be 18 years old and you had to be in the service for 6 months. 6 months to the day I had orders, I was on my way to Vietnam. It didn't take long. It just so happened that the day that I was headed to Vietnam, the day that I came home from to start my route to Vietnam, my next door neighbor who had been killed in Vietnam was having his funeral. It's unfortunate, but you know, that didn't deter me. I'm already hooked. I'm going to fly. You know, one of the things that really solidified that interest in flying, I don't know if anybody here remembers 1968 in the spring when DC was burning and they had riots. Well, the 82nd Airborne came up and you know, helped out the DC National Guard and the police and camped out in my high school. Okay, paratroopers right there in our ROTC armory. They parked the helicopter right across the street at the golf course parking lot. And I mean, that was it for me. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get into helicopters, and I know where they are. They're right over there in Vietnam. Early in 1970 now, I'd only been there for maybe a couple of weeks, and I'm out there in a 2-man machine gun pit at night on the perimeter, and I'm with a guy who was from New York. And you know, it's just me and him. We're watching the wire because the memory of Tet 1968 is still fresh. So everyone's at a high alert. And this is as we get close to the end of January. And this guy's going to sleep. And you know, I'm still new enough that I'm still wound up, you know, thinking that you have to do it exactly what the book says if you want to stay alive. during that phase, I was still of the mindset that I have to survive 365 days of this stuff in order to make it back home. Now, I know Mom's praying for me because I saw her praying for my older brother in the Army, my other older brother in the Navy, and my sister's away. I know she's praying for me, and that's probably going to help, but there's no way I'm going to make it 365 days. And then you get to a phase in the middle where you don't care. You know, say, hey, you're going to die anyway. It don't mean nothing. Okay, just go out and do it. And for probably the next 8 months, that's exactly how it was. You know, you don't care. You don't care about anything. You know, bullets, things blowing up, it doesn't matter. It don't mean nothing. And then there's a phase, probably 45 days or so before it's time for you to go home. And all of a sudden you say, I'm still alive. Okay, maybe I am going to get back home. And now you become extra cautious. And that pattern was fairly common. I mean, guys, it probably didn't matter where you were. But one of the weird things about Vietnam is that your experience depended a lot on where you were, what job you had, and when you were there. Because Vietnam in 1966 was a very different place than Vietnam in 1972, perhaps. A wide variety of experiences. But let me tell you about my experience. Just barely 18 years old with an M60 machine gun, and I can remember a whole year of cold showers, no hot water, anywhere. Okay, and you walk, out of your hooch. Okay, if this was a place where you lived, the walls would only come up about 4 feet, and the rest up above that was a screen, because it was so hot. Screen with wood that was kind of louvered downward so you couldn't look straight through. You walk out the door, you walk down a little path, and you go to the community showers, and you turn on the cold water, okay? Now, as bad as that seems, I know that there were some guys in Vietnam who'd never had showers. So the experience was very different depending on where you were. I can remember being in a helicopter and we're going out on a night mission, and every time you went out at night, you're going to get shot at. You guys have seen the map of Vietnam. Well, there was this thing called the Ho Chi Minh Trail that came down along here through Laos, Cambodia, and that's how they brought weapons and people all the way into the Mekong Delta. And it came in at various places all along here. So if you were close to the border, you met the entrance points of the Ho Chi Minh Trail over and over again. Every night they would be out there coming in, okay? So this is where I was. All of this area down here in Four Corps, in the Mekong Delta, and right up here where Saigon is, or north of Saigon, just slightly there. I can sit down at a table with a blank piece of paper and I can draw you a map of that whole area from seeing it all. I mean, flying around the skies of Vietnam. It's an unforgettable experience. But one thing happened in the spring of 1970. Remember Kent State and the 4 students who were killed? Well, this is what they were protesting. After I'd been there for a few months, the president at the time decided not to pay attention to those sanctuaries on the other side of the Cambodian border. And we had this large U.S. military incursion across the border into Cambodia. And that's what all of this blue area is. And that lasted, maybe a couple of months. I think the president made a promise that he would be out by the end of May, and this started either in March or April. But that changed the nature of the war. Okay, so now it's no longer a war in Vietnam, it's a war in Cambodia and in Laos, and that had repercussions later on. Okay, if you remember the movie The Killing Fields, that was part of the fallout because it pushed the leadership of that country out. So we had significant responsibility for what happened in Southeast Asia. So now I'm making my way through, and I'm in that last 45 days or so where you start to get really, really cautious and really concerned. And and the strangest thing is you get to a phase where you're not even sure you want to go home. You don't know if you want to go back home, because home is so different now from the life you've been living for the past year. There are things here that you can depend on. There really are. There are people you can depend on. You know what's expected of you. You know your job. You know how to do the job after you've been doing it for 9 months or so. And home is now an unknown. It really is an unknown. Even you were there just a little while ago, but that experience has changed you forever. And I suspect that that's the case with any kind of war. We, those of us who went to Vietnam in the 60s, probably in the early 70s, were the children of that greatest generation. You know, my father was in World War II, his brother was in World War II, my mother's brothers were both in World War II. You know, everyone, 16 million Americans fought in World War II or involved in that. But I tell you that I've been encouraged, because one of the jobs that I had in the Navy, well, I had a couple of great jobs. I commanded an F-14 squadron out in Miramar in San Diego. I know that's hard to believe. If for no other reason, I don't look like Tom Cruise or anybody else in that movie, Top Gun. So I understand your disbelief, but that's okay. That's all right. I've got pictures of me standing in front of the squadron, okay? I commanded the Navy boot camp at Great Lakes. 50,000 sailors come through there. There's only one boot camp in the Navy, 50,000 a year. And time again, I would tell the sailors, the parents, and anybody else who would listen, that this guy at 17 or 18 years old, or this girl, is a significantly different person than the one who walked in the door 8 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, 12 weeks ago. 12 weeks ago, this person wouldn't make up their own bed, okay? And wouldn't even give a darn about anybody else except themselves, okay? This one now recognizes that when we all lend a hand on that shovel, that we can dig quite a trench, that we can. That when we all do our jobs, that we all go home and have dinner and eat a big steak and laugh and joke about it. And that's something that I wish we could kind of put that mindset into every young person in the country. But I knew what I wanted to do. So I was willing to do the 3 years. And after those 3 years were up, hung around in the streets, working little jobs. I recognized that there's not much future in that. And remember the saying from United Negro College Fund, a mine is a terrible thing to waste? Well, it took a couple of years before that sunk in. So I ended up going to Howard University. I was a pre-med student in biology and chemistry. They had an Air Force ROTC unit there, and I found myself wandering down to that space every day just to look at pictures of airplanes. And then it hit me, that's what I really want to do. Okay, I can be a doctor, make a lot of money, mom will be happy, my fingernails will be clean. Okay, but every time I look up in the sky, that's where I really want to be. So I went straight to the Navy as soon as I graduated from Howard, and the rest is history. Tomcats for about 27 years or so on aircraft carriers. Most of my adult life has been spent on aircraft carriers, flying from the decks of ships and landing on ships and trying to stay out of the water. Okay. Again, my mama prayed for me. And I'm back here in Prince George's County. I was teaching high school in Prince George's County for about 8 years. Now I'm teaching high school in Washington, D.C. and trying to generate a few more who feel the same way I do. That you see something you want, and it doesn't matter how far it is, how high that hill is, you're going after it. You go after it, and you put all of your effort into that, and don't give up when the first 5 people or the first 10 people tell you, no, you can't. William Tecumseh Sherman, way back in 1864 or so, is credited with saying war is hell. It sure is. It sure is. There's no doubt about it. It is hell, and it will change you forever. Now, hopefully it doesn't destroy you. Hopefully it doesn't destroy you. And that's where the community comes in, that after you come back and you are in a state of confusion because the world has moved on from where it was when you left. It's a different world now, different people, different attitudes, and you're gonna need some community support to kind of readjust yourself and blend back into that society. And thank goodness I was young enough to be flexible enough, and my mama prayed for me. So thank you very much.
That's all for this edition of Veterans in Transition. We ask that you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. If you have a story idea, reach out to us at vetsintransition.com. And remember, we all have a story to tell. Until next time.
But I love the Army, and I had an uncle, and he was a Vietnam veteran. He was a Vietnam veteran, and we didn't know how to deal with Uncle. You know, so everybody was saying things about Uncle. I realized I have turned into that uncle. Everybody's scared to be around me, but my wife keeps me in good because we got a dog. Got a dog named Hokey. I'm a Virginia Tech Hokie fan. I love Hokey. Hokey is a little Yorkie, okay? Can't stand Hokey. Hokey was supposed to be a football dog. My wife done turned Hokey into a lifetime dog. He's sitting up there crying at the shows with my wife. Now they sitting there trying to get Hokey straight, you know, Hokey trying to use the bathroom on time. Now Hokey make a mistake and use the bathroom on in the house. Oh, he just trying. I make a mistake, use the bathroom in the house. I'm nasty.